The Naperville Eldercare channel is brought to you by Kathy Wetters and the great folks with Right at Home of Chicago's southwest suburbs. Today's guest is Mark Hayes, owner of Hayes Funeral and Cremation Service.
Welcome back to the Naperville Eldercare channel. We're excited today to have Mark Hayes from Hayes Funeral and Cremation Service in Bolingbrook. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for having me.
So just maybe start off with a philosophical question. Because I'm seeing more and more when I read obituaries sometimes of our prior clients, people aren't choosing sometimes to have funerals, and I think that's maybe not the wisest decision, but it's the decision they make. Why have a funeral? What's the benefits?
The benefits to having a funeral are that the funerals are a lot of times people say it's for the living, so that you can have closure. But also it brings the reality to the fact that to families that their loved one is deceased. Mm-hmm. It does bring closure, and it does bring some peace, hopefully, and it allows people to gather and remember the person, the good, the bad, whatever. It just allows them to gather, bring closure to them. That's the reason for an actual visitation funeral.
So the visit. So if you omit that step, you're really kind of short-circuiting some of the important part of the grief process.
Correct. Exactly. It is part of the grief process, but the reason people are choosing not to do funerals a lot of times nowadays are that for a cost factor, mm-hmm. but also the fact that everyone is spread apart around the country.
Yes.
So for families to come in and do that, it a lot of times what you're having is you're not having an actual funeral, but you may have a memorial service or a celebration of life later on, mm-hmm. when people can actually gather. So the actual service portion is done short at the time of death, but then the family can usually choose to do a memorial or a celebration of life at a later time, which does provide them the closure if they choose to do that.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, I understand what you mean. I see that more and more. I grew up in the part of the country where it was maybe it's a throwback time where it's a 3-day process. You pass today, you visit tomorrow, and you bury the next day. Yep. And for the most part, in that part of the country, it's kind of stuck with it. So I'm kind of learning a kind of a different way to view.
Yes.
What does a funeral director do? If you could kind of go through the steps. I know it's involved.
What we do is we are the person that will control the remains. First off, we take the remains into our care. Mm-hmm. We will either prepare the body if you're choosing to do a regular traditional funeral service, mm-hmm. or we hold the remains till cremation if you've chosen cremation, mm-hmm. till the legal paperwork is done. We also file all the legal paperwork for you, which includes the person's death certificate. We help arrange the actual services. We work between all the different entities, churches, cemeteries, florists. We put everything together. We're the arranger of the services. That's why that's why it's director, because we do direct everything. We help the family make sure that everything is taken care of for them.
And when you're dealing with the family under such stressful times, it's communication. There's your interpersonal skills are really called upon.
Correct.
At that time.
Correct. Mm-hmm. And the best thing to do, I find the best thing to do is when someone passes is a lot of times families want to get everything started, mm-hmm. and my philosophy is give yourself some time to take in the fact that your loved one is gone, mm-hmm. then come see me the following day. I always try to make arrangements the following day with the family so that they do have some time to gather themselves, mm-hmm. realize that their loved one is gone, mm-hmm. and have a little bit of grieving themselves. Mm-hmm. But also, in order to do the death certificate and the information to proceed with the funeral, it does take the family some time to gather that information up, so it's always mm-hmm. best, and give them a little bit of a clearer head too when you're meeting with them, so that they're making a proper decision on what they want to do with their loved one. Mm-hmm. So
what's some things like the family would need to get together maybe some things they wanted to have,
Sure.
pictures.
Pictures, if they're going to do a visitation or a service, you want to do photos of the deceased are always good. I also recommend having, if grandma was a quilter and had a favorite quilt, let's bring that. Those are the things that you're going to remember your loved one about. Bring the favorite things, and let's try to, it is a celebration of that person's life. So let's bring the things that are important to that person, or were important to you for that person. So it's those types of things that you want to bring and display. So
when the death does occur, especially when it's unexpected, people frequently just don't know what to do. So what should a family member or friends do when death occurs?
When the death actually occurs, depending on where the death occurs, if the death occurs at home and the decedent is not on hospice care, the family does need to call 911 and report the death as a home death to the police department. The police department will come out. They will do what's called a death investigation. They will confirm that there is no undue circumstances in the death. Then they contact the county coroner, and then the coroner will give permission to release the body to a funeral home. At that time, the family can contact their local funeral director and make arrangements for the removal and transfer into the care of the decedent into a funeral home. So.
Now, I know you perhaps covered this a bit earlier. So when you call, if they're under hospice care, then hospice will handle it. But if not, then you need to dial 911. That's the next one.
If it's at home,
if it's at home,
and they're not on hospice care, if it's a home death, they would need to call 911. Report it to the police so that there is a record of the death, and then they would call the county coroner to clear to release the body to a funeral director. And then once that's done, you can contact your local funeral director to come and transfer the remains. And then if it's a death in a nursing home, the nursing home obviously contacts the coroner and does the necessary paperwork from there. So, and would contact the funeral director.
The next question is a source of many debates in my family: burial or cremation.
Correct. What people don't realize is that you have quite a few options. You have the traditional funeral and wake, and traditional burial, where you would have a visitation, then have a worship service the following day, go to the cemetery for a burial. You also have what's called a direct burial, where there is no services whatsoever. You just bring the body and the casket directly to the cemetery and intern the person if they choose to do that.
How about that?
And then there's cremation. In cremation, there are a wide variety of things that can be done with cremation. There's what's called direct cremation, where there is no services. That's when your loved one would pass away. We would transfer them into our care, do all the legal paperwork, cremate them once the paperwork is obtained, and return the remains to the family. And then there is the option to do a visitation and then cremation following. So you can still do a traditional visitation, wake service, go to church, but then the final disposition of the remains is the cremation process. So that can be done for families. And then there's always the cremation where it's done and then you have a memorial service or a celebration of life service.
Celebration of life, yes. So all those
you have
are
options.
Many good options.
And the biggest thing for families to do is to make sure that you're educating yourself on all the options that are available.
Yes, and don't be kind of just to go along with what's suggested. To make sure you understand your alternatives. That's such a good advice. Now, I know some of my own relatives over time, they're like, I don't want to have, at the visitation, I don't want to have the casket open or whatever. So what's some of the benefits or drawbacks to families to think about when you have a public viewing of a person?
The benefit is that you get to see the loved one. You get to see your loved one. You get to realize that your loved one is actually deceased, and their friends and family can come and see them, and they realize that as well, and they pay their respects properly to the family members that are there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you choose, some family members, I get people that say, I don't want to have an open casket.
Yes.
If that's truly what you don't want, provide us with a photo and we can place the photo on top of the casket. That way people still realize that you're inside the casket, because that's the biggest fear, is that people think the person isn't there. So that's where they need the closure to see, to realize it.
The mind's a unique thing. Sometimes you can trick yourself into a denial state,
Exactly.
can't you? You're
Correct.
there, but you just can't connect without looking
Correct.
at them. Yes, yes. Now, what is the purpose of embalming process?
The purpose of embalming is to preserve the body so that you can do a visitation. So if the family needs time to come in from out of town, you need to do services, later on. It's a chemical preserving of the body so that you can do a viewing at a later date is what it is for.
I see.
So that you can do a service.
Now, is that required by law?
It's not required by law, but it is required if you are having a public viewing.
Okay.
If there's a public viewing, the funeral home does have the right to require embalming so that the body is prepared properly for that viewing. So.
Now, some folks, if they've never planned funerals before, they will, when you speak to them later, they will say, it was such sticker shock to me as what this whole process cost. Why are funerals so expensive, do you think?
It's a process of, when you look at a funeral bill, you hear, we spent $14,000, $15,000. It's broken down into other elements, though. It's not only what the funeral director's charges are, or the facility charges. Those costs are one thing, but then you also have a cost of a cemetery. Those costs, so when you hear the big expensive fee, it's usually the combination of the cemetery and the funeral home bill together came to this amount. The cemetery bill is totally separate from what a director's or a funeral home's fees are, so keep that in mind as well.
Right,
and I do want to cover one more point, go back to one more point regarding the embalming. It is not required by law. If you choose not to do embalming, you have the option to choose another type of arrangement, which would be either a direct burial, as we were speaking of, or cremation. So those would be the options that would be available if you chose not to do embalming. So I just want to clarify that. If families chose not to do embalming, there are other options that families can choose.
They can go through, sure. It's just some other cost drivers of a funeral would be, I guess, the casket.
Correct. The merchandise that you choose. Keep in mind it is your choice to choose what you would like to do. So that does cost. And the other item is there is the cost of the cemetery and the vault, which is required by the cemetery requirement. It is not a requirement of the funeral home. We sell them to you so that it is a requirement of the cemetery. And what a vault does is it protects the casket inside. The casket is placed in the vault and placed into the ground. That protects the casket from the above ground, from the earth on top, from the casket crushing. That's the purpose of the vault.
Yes.
So, it's required by cemeteries. So.
Sure. Now, and then families frequently will have like a spray of flowers across the top, and then that drives that all goes into the cost. Sure. Now, if you choose cremation, is there parts of the funeral arrangements you can omit or change? How does that?
Cremation can be done in a couple different ways. As I spoke earlier, you can do a traditional viewing where the body would be prepared. It would still be embalmed, prepared. We would use either a church place of worship for this visitation or a funeral home, and then the body would be cremated at the end. Or you have what's called a direct cremation, where there are no services and the body is cremated, and there is no embalming in that case. And then you do have the option with embalming if you wanted to do what's called a viewing or identification or a witnessing of the cremation. You can, depending on the crematory, you can actually witness the cremation.
I did not realize.
Or come in and identify your loved one and spend a few minutes with them before cremation is done. So it just has to be arranged with, depending on the funeral home or crematory.
In advance. Now, the remains after cremation, they can be put in a mausoleum?
They're placed. They can be either placed at home.
Mhm.
You can leave them at home if you choose to
Yes.
keep them, or you can have them buried, or you can scatter remains. The only thing with scattering remains is that I would tell you to check with your local municipality to make sure that it's legal to do that. And that would be the thing is, people scatter remains, but you want to make sure you're doing it in a proper place and
Yes.
that you're legally doing it the proper way.
Like a favorite, I know a family that had a lovely cabin up in Wisconsin, and they wanted just to go up there as a family and spread the
Correct.
ashes. So. What is memorialization for cremation?
Memorialization means that you can do a memorial service, or you can also do, that's also in regards to if you're burying the cremains in the cemetery, you can still place a headstone on the grave where the cremains are. So you can still put a traditional headstone there.
Okay.
So you're memorializing your loved ones so that they are, identified. Even though they're cremated, there's not a in-ground casket, but the urn is placed in the ground, and you can still, so that there would be a traditional headstone, or doing a memorial service at either a church or people do them at country clubs, those type of things.
Yes.
So depending on the type of service you wanted to do.
So if you had a couple and they couldn't agree on the same, perhaps, method, and one was going to have a burial with a casket and one for cremation, then they basically can be placed at that same site.
That is correct.
Okay.
They can be done, whoever is buried first, so if the person passes away first, that is the traditional burial, the casket is buried there, and then normally cemeteries allow you to place the urn at the foot end of what would be the grave for the party that is already buried there.
Sure. Now, something that comes up later, not necessarily immediately following, but do you give them any advice, the families, about how to handle income taxes when they lose a spouse?
I do provide them with, if they need it, I offer. I have an attorney that I deal with.
Yes.
That's an estate attorney. I also have a couple different financial planners that they could ask their legal questions to. And if they need an accountant, I do have that. I also have a list of other tradesmen, those type of things. I find myself, I tell people, I laugh because I tell people that I become the shell answer man, because the families come to me and say, well, we need to do this, we need to do that. Do you especially if they're from out of town and mom and dad live here and they've lived out of town for a while and they come back, they don't know who mom and dad was dealing with, so they're trying to get things done. And usually I can find them a person that they need, either a tradesperson or a professional person to assist them. If I can't, I reach out to my network of folks, and I usually can find a name from them to give them. So,
when you're thinking about veterans, who is eligible for military funeral honors?
Any veteran that is honorably discharged is eligible for military honors. They would need to provide the funeral director with what's called a DD-214, which is their discharge paperwork.
Okay.
Every veteran usually knows what that is.
They're familiar.
And every veteran usually can tell the family where to find it. So we would need to do that, and then we submit that to what's called the National Eligibility Office through the military, and they confirm that the person is honorably discharged, and they will work with us to set up the military honors. And what the military honors consist of is either at the place of worship or the funeral at the cemetery. The branch of military will come out. They will play taps. They will fold the flag, and they will present it to the next of kin.
Yes.
And then if a veteran chooses to go out to Abraham Lincoln National Cemetery out in Elwood, which is our national cemetery there, they do have what's called a memorial squad, which is made up of retired veterans that will do a 21-gun salute in addition to the folding of the flag and presenting of taps.
Awesome.
And they present the family with 3 case showings from the 21 gun salute. So it's a very nice service that the veteran is entitled to, and the family is entitled to as well. So.
Obviously, we live in a large metropolitan area, and I bet, I'm just betting that many folks just don't realize that wonderful national cemetery is sitting in the south.
That's correct. Well, they also don't realize that it's a free
Yes.
service to the veteran and the spouse and a special needs child, if there's a special needs child within the family. So there is, and it doesn't necessarily, the other thing is that the family needs to know that if the spouse passes away that is not the veteran, they can still be interned at the cemetery while the veteran is still alive. That's the benefit. The benefit goes to the spouses, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be the veteran that passes away first.
Gotcha.
A lot of times, families, if they choose cremation, if the spouse passes away that's not the veteran, they will cremate the remains and keep the remains at home until the veteran is deceased, and then bring both of them out at the same time for interment. So it's totally up to the family how they want to do that. So
that's really neat, because the spouse usually has been that was with them when they were in the service, and so if their final service could be together, that seems like that would be so meaningful.
Correct. And in addition to and you have the option of either doing, at the cemetery, you have the option of either doing a traditional burial, which would include the vault, it includes the grave itself, and then it would include the headstone for the veteran and also the spouse. And then if they chose to do cremation, they would have the option of either an in-ground burial with a headstone, or they would have the option of being in what's called a columbarium, which is the above ground, or what people know as a niche, where you would place the remains in there, and then they do receive the marker there as well, the headstone marker there as well. So.
Now, what if a family, obviously if things happen and a loved one dies unexpectedly and they just financially are strapped and need help, do you give them advice on that?
I can refer them to such places as Catholic Charities, nonprofit groups. I will try to help them and work with them to provide them the information that they would need to reach out to and see. So those are there are groups out there that can help them, but they do need to reach out to them and check to see how they would qualify for that. So.
Now you're located in Bolingbrook.
Correct.
Do you have a wide area you find yourself servicing?
I service anywhere. Basically, I service Cook County, DuPage County, Will County, and I will. In addition, I do some in Kane and Grundy counties as well. So I cover a wide variety of areas. Correct. So.
And it seems, and from what I've learned earlier, you seem to the military burials. You're quite the expert on the process.
Well, I'm not so much an expert on it, but I am a big believer. I come from a family of veterans. I had 2 uncles. I have a great uncle that was a survivor of Pearl Harbor, and I have another uncle that was all of my uncles were in the military. So, but I'm a big believer in making sure that the veterans receive their benefits. It's what they're entitled to.
Absolutely,
so it's my way of thanking them for their service to our country. So.
Yes, and that is so meaningful. Now, Mark, how would an individual get in contact with you?
They can do it one of 2 ways. They can contact me by phone, which is 630-536-9507, or they can go to my website, which is www.hayes, HAYES, funeral, all one word, .com. And I just wanted to mention on the website, if you look at my website, I do have some information there. I have a video that kind of introduces myself, and then if you look under plans and pricing tab, there is a animated video that explains your cremation options for families. So that is done.
Really like your website. I was looking at it last evening.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me. And hopefully families have learned a little bit more and can make a more educated decision when their time that they need a funeral director would be. So,
You have a peace of mind
Exactly.
after the event. Well, thank you.